welcome back from your lovely break. We now move forward with our next panel discussion, exploring the use of new technologies. I'd love to welcome Steve Manthorp, who's already sat to chair. Steve is a pioneering games artist, projection artist and curator, as well as a project manager at the Cultural Institute, and he will be welcoming our panel. Thank you.
Very much. Could I please welcome up Powell and Jade Richardson of Artfelt, Claire Garside, Foundation for Digital Creativity, Abbie Canning, Darius Powell at Quad, and Gail, Dudson, and Chris Morris taking the place of Ian Nichols from Yorkshire Youth and Music. Thank you all very much. I'd like to ask you all to introduce recent projects that you've worked on. And if it's all right, we'll start with Jade and Kat.
Yes, so my name's Kat Powell. I'm the manager of Artfelt, and that's the arts programme at Sheffield Children's Hospital. We're here to talk about a digital app that we've commissioned, but actually more broadly, we do anything that involves commissioning an art for wellbeing within the hospital environment, and also we run quite an extensive and diverse arts workshop programme.
And I'm Jade Richardson. I'm the Digital and Arts Commissioner for Artfelt, working in Sheffield Children's Hospital. And this project is it's much easier to kind of show you the video rather than me start explaining it. So. As you can see, it's augmented reality, but I thought a lot of people might not understand what augmented reality is. A lot of people think about virtual reality when they think about computer-generated worlds that are immersive. But what you could see there was Sheffield Children's Burns Treatment Room, which is a room where children experience high amounts of pain. And what we were trying to do with this project is not necessarily impacting children with mental health, but in the broader context, understanding the impact we have within that process, and kind of mitigating things such as anxiety by understanding the process from start to finish. So one of the things with this is it's very holistic, and we kind of work with the staff to change the way that the whole process works before children even enter the room. So I think that's why we thought it might be an interesting project to try and bring.
That's great, thanks very much. Perhaps next, if we have Gail and Chris sing, as you're on the far end, if you
okay.
care to introduce yourself.
Shall I start? Mm-hmm. Okay. This is a double act. My name's Gail Dudson. I'm the director of Yorkshire Youth and Music. That's a music education company that works almost exclusively with children in challenging circumstances in lots of different arenas. And we're here today to talk about the work that we do in Secure Children's Home, and particularly at the Secure Children's Home in Leeds, which is basically a music project.
It is, yeah. We engage, this secure unit has 24 young people in it, in there for a variety of reasons. Some will be there for criminal convictions, and some will be there because they've been placed there by the courts for either their own safety, or mostly for their own safety. All of them are considered vulnerable young people, at risk of either violent behaviour or violent communities, either sexual exploitation, or just in danger of criminality and entering and even a spiral of criminality. So they've been placed there, and from a minimum of 3 months up to some 2 years, 4 years. Some young people are there for very long sentences, but it only goes up to 18, and then those young people will move into adult prisons. So we provide, I'm a music practitioner, but I will use any kind of means to engage those young people, and any kind of media, in whatever way, to kind of bring them, just to engage. Arts practice for them is quite a rare thing. I've had young people come in and look at a guitar and go, "What the fuck is that?" They don't do that where I come from, which was Middlesbrough. I'm sure they do. But of course, they have quite a strong. All young people have a very strong relationship to digital media. So digital media is a way in, but of course, as we've already heard, and I'm sure we will discuss, it has its problems as well.
That's great, thank you. You'll notice that everyone except Claire brought mates with them. So, would you like to introduce
Thanks,
your own
Steve.
work?
So I'm Claire Garside. After many years of being a technology teacher, I am now part-time postgraduate researcher at the university. And also, nearly 2 years ago, a couple of us set up a community interest company, which is the Foundation for Digital Creativity, and looking at the Internet of Things, digital education, computing education for any teachers amongst you, and allowing everybody from Key Stage 1 to PhD to engage with that industrial technology and make a difference to the world around them and how they connect. So my thesis title at the moment, because obviously it changes quite often, is how can maker education, how can computer science impact on children's mental health and well-being? And I don't actually believe it's the paradox that I thought it was, first of all. So I haven't got a friend, but I've got a thing. Because we talk a lot about thinking, and anybody who is as old as me and might have heard of somebody called Seymour Papert. So Papert's team at MIT gave us Scratch, the cat that goes across the screen, in a programming language which children in primary schools and secondary schools now. In 1980, Papert wrote a book called Mindstorms, even before computers went into my secondary school. And he spoke about objects to think with. So my coffee cup now is our latest project. So it's Clean Air Day. And within here, it's not the Internet of Things, it's the Internet of Curious Things. This is tracking air pollution. So you have to program it yourself. And as a Key Stage 1 child, or a PhD student, or for me walking to campus this morning, you can track how filthy or clean the air is around you. And you can make changes. So it's Industry 4 to everybody, it's sensor. I track everything because I'm a postgraduate researcher. So I'm tracking the number of steps, I'm tracking the route that I walk. There is actually a healthier side of the road for me to walk on. And I realised that somebody said that because actually there's somebody called James Tate at the University at Transport who was speaking on the radio this morning. So he did it at the university with very expensive technology. We're democratising that and making sure that everybody can access it and again connect with the world around. I can measure my well-being by the route that I take, not just the quickest route, which is the most healthy, taking 3 steps back from the pedestrian crossing. If I call into the Arts University on the way home and see an exhibition, I can track that and how do I feel. So I'll probably talk about new technologies. Okay.
That's great, thank you. And Abbie and Darius.
Hi, my name is Abbie Canning. I'm the QClub Programme Curator at Derby Quad. QClub is a group for children and young people aged 5 to 18 years old who are on the autistic spectrum or have disabilities, additional support needs, are socially excluded or requiring additional support really to access activities. We have a number of pathways where children access our service. All of the young people are referred to us and parents can self-refer, but we have good working relationships across Derby City with clinical psychologists, social care, support workers, MAT teams, and they regularly work with families and refer them to us to come and engage. And essentially QClub is creative arts focusing around digital exploration in that way. Would you say, Darius?
No, absolutely. So I'm Darius Powell. I'm digital producer at Quad. But I started off in participation. and kind of, that's where I kind of, started about 15 years ago now when I first met Abbie. So my role at Quad day to day is more working with artists and business using technology, digital technology. But my other half of what I do is working in participation with QClub, and what that allows us to do is actually take that technology we're developing to work with artists from all over the world on quite international, quite big exhibitions, and be able to take that and actually use it in workshops with QClub. It's great. So we've got access to virtual reality, augmented reality, game making, the whole host. So
every term we do a project for the young people, and we will develop that project around the Seligman PERMA model, which is all of the aspects that a young person needs to maintain their well-being and build resilience, basically. So it's usually a process of me saying, can we do this, Darius?
So Abbie knows what all that means. I know how to make things appear on screen.
Darius makes it happen. I say, I want to do this and I'll do this, and Darius saying, well, maybe we'll have to do it this way or that way.
Yeah, but a lot of what my job is taking quite a complex thing, breaking it down so it's accessible for everyone, and that's what we want to do. So, and that's the beauty of making things like games, for instance, or kind of virtual worlds, which we're going to showcase later. Everyone can input into that, even if it's doing watercolours for the sky or creating big, monsters out of cardboard and things, or using Google SketchUp. Everybody with their skill sets can interact and be a part of it.
We develop the projects so that each child can have their individual contribution coming to a whole, because a lot of the young people we work with want their own thing and they want to see their own thing. They really struggle to make a combined thing. So we kind of develop the projects so each young person can have their individual contribution to make a greater whole. So obviously that builds a relationship and a sense of belonging and connectedness for those young people as well. And then every term we have an exhibition as well of the work, so we publicly exhibit the work, and we have an exhibition opening, don't we?
Yes.
And they invite everyone and their families and friends, so they get the opportunity to share their achievements as well.
Thank you very
Sorry,
much.
I got carried away.
That's, no, not at all. No. That's thank you very much all for the snapshots of what you do. I think we've got a kind of spectacularly broad range of projects and programs to go at. It's a bit perverse, I think, having a panel on based around technology, because it could just as easily be based around arts and mental health using pencils. Technology is just a tool. But perhaps, and I think Chris hinted at this when he was speaking, perhaps there is a particular reason why technology projects work well with young people. So I wonder if each of you, in any order you like, possibly let's start at the end and work towards me, but do feel free to chip in as and when. But I wonder if you could talk about the opportunities and maybe the limitations of using technological platforms in arts and health work with young people.
Right, I'm going to give you a very concrete example that's actually not from Secure Children's Home, and that was so we do some work occasionally in an inpatient psychiatric unit in South Yorkshire, where quite a lot of the young people who are there are not there voluntarily, and quite a lot of them have enormous problems or difficulties in expressing themselves in front of groups of other people. So one of the things that we have done is using say iPads, GarageBand, that kind of thing, to make their own little tune, or to do some drawing with it, make a thing for themselves. They can make a thing for themselves which is a musical output, but they don't have to perform it. They can just turn it round and show it to everyone else. And that's a way in which, because one of the difficulties about music as a practice is that at some point you nearly always have to stand up in front of other people and do it. And this is a situation where you don't have to do it that way if you're not comfortable with it. And also means that if you think you might be comfortable about doing something, but then don't quite want to at the last minute, you've got your backup. So that's just an example, I think, of one of the ways in which working with people who may have mental health issues, although to be fair, lots of us feel like that about performing in public, so it's not just young people with mental health problems. Okay, Chris?
Thank you. Digital media is, for me, it's like for our young people, is often the access point to the activity. Young people will walk into my music room and see drums, guitars, basses, keyboards, and are often quite intimidated by that. So they'll go searching for something familiar, and there's an iMac in the corner, or there's an iPad, and they go, I'm doing that, and that's fine. So what we can do is, for instance, we can go onto YouTube. We can engage in some listening. We can listen to a few tracks. We can start identifying instruments that are on those records. We can then perhaps go into a program and then find those instruments on the program, just the sounds, and we can spend hours doing that. Perhaps we can then progress to them playing those sounds, and then suddenly we've got somebody playing music, and suddenly those instruments that they were very scared of are suddenly much more accessible, and they want to get on them. And I say, you'll be better at those, the drum sounds you're trying to play on your keyboard. Why don't we play the actual drums? And there's a nice access point there, which is very different, because my generation, pre-digital music generation, that's what we learned on analog instruments, and we developed into digital media, but it seems to be working the other way now. It's just one example.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of thinking about Artfelt, and obviously it's specifically a hospital setting, but I think part of what we do as Artfelt is we try and challenge the preconceptions of what hospitals should be like. So I've been doing it for quite a few years now, and as part of that we're always pushing at the boundaries of what people expect to see in a hospital, and I think there's a way of designing the hospitals that's very safe. Obviously they can be quite risk averse places, and we've commissioned many artists over the years and it really transformed our physical space, but for me it was I've been reflecting on it recently, it's starting to feel quite static, and I feel if we're kind of positioning ourselves as people who are trying to push our expectations, then we need to maintain relevance with the young people that come into our setting and embrace technology. And when I've looked at trying to do that in the past, again this risk aversion kind of raises its head. A lot of stuff, particularly if there might be connections to the internet with what we want to do, but actually the practicalities of the physical space that we have, there isn't really very good Wi-Fi access through a lot of the hospital. There's not, nobody has the funding to maintain things on a regular basis, and I think people go around other hospitals and just see broken bits of tech all the time. So we didn't want to commission anything where we would be accused of kind of falling into those traps. But as you may or may not be aware, Sheffield Children's Hospital has recently opened quite a large new wing, which has really transformed the space, and we have better capabilities now to use technology, and I think that's why it felt like it was a good time to start looking at how we can embrace technology more, and also use that element of kind of surprise and change, as I say, people's expectations. And when we're talking about reduction in anxiety, I think that really is part of that. Like we're kind of trying to create nice things in a place where nobody really wants to be, and so you don't want to disrespect the fact that it's a hospital, but I still think you can be really playful within that setting.
I think in terms of digital potential, I think of the example, or something that you were talking about there that really resonated, was the kind of the way that digital is very malleable. It has that flexibility to very quickly develop and change to what happens, or what you research, or what your findings are. So when we did user testing, one of the things we noticed was that because we designed it so that the parent would use it with the child, they had a job, and the staff were like, oh, the parent was less anxious, and the child didn't pick up on their anxiety. And then we were like, oh, well, that was kind of something we hadn't even considered, but that was like a real plus. And when we were doing the user testing, we found that children who were younger we're tapping a lot. So we were like talking to the programmers. I was like, right, we want more tap interactions. You know, we want more you know, sounds and things that work for younger children. So it has that flexibility to kind of like evolve with a project like as you quite quickly as you know, as you kind of research. And also it has that kind of ability also to have that warmth. So a lot of the things that we put in are quite humorous, because a lot of the staff feedback was like, we like to have a bit of a joke with the kids, like that works really well. And it's like, sometimes people can think of digital being quite cold, but actually when you work with the staff and you think about the whole process from start to finish, you can bring in what works. So I think it's the being able to kind of understand how those processes work that's really interesting, because then you can develop them and use them as a creative tool effectively.
I was just thinking of one of the really great things that you developed as part of the project when we're talking about limitations, and what I was saying about maintenance is that the casing and the way that it self-charges, so you know that so that you don't have that. Sorry, I don't want to speak for you about your project, but so you don't have that kind of staff error where where the iPad would just lose charge. But go on, you tell me a little bit more about that. But I think that's quite interesting when we're looking at limitations.
So kind of like thinking about the process being quite seamless. We worked with AMRC to design really simply just a unit that means that the game self-loads as soon as you take it off the wall. So there isn't that kind of like digital exclusion element. So the way we can work with the staff is kind of like telling them how they can bring people into the room and show them this exciting immersive experience, rather than, you know, someone being nervous that, oh, it's not going to be charged and not being invested and engaged in it. And part of that is involving and working with staff right from the start. So but it sounds like a really simple thing, but actually the fact that it's always going to be charged and it'll instantly load up and turn off and reset is just a simple thing, but it makes a big difference.
I'm going to start with the limitations. So if I talk about the formal curriculum, then the curriculum and maybe teacher development, which is something that we offer, and we're supporting schools and teachers with development of the computing curriculum for those leadership teams that don't see it as a priority, and actually it's not offered as a subject, even though it's a foundation subject. Fundamentally, our work with technology is to help schools to deliver the computing curriculum and to deliver that digital offering for students to be able to use it across every different subject, to amplify pupil voice, to make the connection of how things work in the world around us, and also to consider diversity in who's actually creating these algorithms around us. So to understand how Facebook works, how your feed changes dependent on what you've liked or you haven't liked. As you've walked in this morning, if you've had a location tracker on, and Google has been tracking your every move and all that metadata that comes around, to have that understanding with, going back to Papert, he talks about the constructionist approach to learning by making, going through difficult patches, debugging your work, finding the faults. Is it fail? If you like to use that language, I don't mostly. You know, we talk about fail as a first attempt in learning. It's iterative design. So really to amplify pupil voice. And again, the object to think with, I don't know if you saw the pom-pom in there. There's a canary pom-pom. So a group of children had got the wool out, created the canary. Are we all canaries of the 21st century? They did some event-driven programming, text-based programming, quite often in Year 9. They were much younger. They've written the algorithm and they won't release it on GitHub because they don't agree with Gove and DEFRA. So there's a particular level of particulate matter in the air that DEFRA will say is fairly safe. They say that if you've got anything in the air, we don't think that's safe. So they're not releasing it. Pupil voice, quite strong.
In our experience, or my experience, sorry for talking for you, Darius.
Talk for me, by all means.
We see the opportunities with the digital media is a way of engaging the young people. Most young people nowadays have a telephone. So the work that we do, we try and engage them initially through that medium really. They all have an interest in technology, in digital media, and we try and transform their relationship with their telephone beyond that use of social media or just communication, but actually as a creative tool. So it kind of works as a transitionary object really, and that can really help with young people that are very anxious, because all of a sudden the focus isn't on them, it's kind of on this intermediary object, and that can really dissipate feelings of anxiety and things, and it's using a technology that they're quite familiar and comfortable with. So there's a real way in there, working with the young people that we do through the use of that technology. And then in terms of trying to transform that use as well, we try and develop projects. We've recently developed a project called QClub Safari app, which we did a whole project where we you know, there's a huge wealth of learning and research regarding the positive benefits on young people of being outdoors, in the outdoor environment, the natural environment. So we started thinking, how can we kind of merge these things? We want to get these kids to appreciate and work with that outdoor and natural environment and get all of those good positive things. So we came up with the QClub Safari app.
So basically, we ripped off Pokemon Go. No, we were inspired.
We were inspired.
If Nintendo are listening. So yeah, we took the idea of Pokemon Go and created an app which would work using GPS, location tracking in our local park. But we also created a version which could be used anywhere. So the idea
Anywhere outside.
Anywhere outside.
It can actually obviously be used inside, but we're not putting them out.
No, absolutely. So on the end product is they will go around the park, they will explore and find these creatures hidden around. They're creatures they've created. But to actually create those creatures, we went to the park last summer when we started the project to collect, stones, twigs, leaves, whatever we can find. And then we used those to create collages. And then we digitized those and then inputted those into the app itself. So I think just to add to what Abbie was saying, I think, yes, we use iPads, we use laptops, etc. But we also try and use traditional methods, more craft-based methods as well. So we do a lot of kind of creating sculptures and then 3D scanning them to digitize them, to bring them into virtual reality, for instance. So, yeah, the iPad, I think, is, like you say, a bridging gap between the traditional and the outdoors and the new
digital contents. The whole program of outdoor activities that we ran, we did lots of different things in there. We had a sound walk where they had headphones on, so they were all there and really being able to record sounds and really picking up amplified on the Bluetooth headphones and stuff. So really trying to draw their attention, and we did lots of different things to draw their attention to how they could feel in this environment. So we were hoping that might encourage them out, and it has a creative element to it. It's not just the Pokemon Go-esque bit. There are creative elements in it as well, which they can take out and create within the app as well, outside. So it's trying to encourage them outdoors as well.
Only Claire made reference to the limitations of technology. I just wondered if anyone else had any experience or anything to say about it.
I think the biggest limitation I come across as a digital artist is the tools themselves, the software. I haven't created these apps we use in workshops. So, for instance, we were making platform games the other day using an app, which is great. It's really good, really good. But there's a few things and it's so frustrating. And as I, as an artist with 20 years experience or whatever, I get frustrated with it. So I know the young people are going to get frustrated. So this app, you're supposed to use this board, aren't you? And you put these little blocks in, which tells you how the platform is and where the enemies are and your collectibles. So it's a physical thing. And then you scan it with the iPad, and then it creates a digital version, which you can then modify and texturize and so forth. Great in theory. Worked at home when I practiced it in my living room with great lighting, but then in a workshop environment with not the best lighting, lots of shadow, with 12 kids with iPads all trying to do it at the same time, it became frustrating. So we had to think on the spot and say, okay, We're not going to do that. We're going to scrap it. The technology is not working for this group at this time. We're just going to use the app and do everything in the app itself. So sometimes you come across things like that, which is frustrations with the tech, and you don't want the young people to become frustrated. So you have to very quickly, obviously, work around that.
And also the accessibility in that user interface can be difficult, but also just purely sometimes the young people we work with, the accessibility of actually the physical use of that. So that can be quite difficult for some young people, but I think that's definitely a limitation. But what we have found is actually the use of VR with children that are very physically disabled and have real problems with mobility has been great, because actually, you know, almost everyone, you know, can put a headset on, but again, there's limitations in that in terms of the age range and the amount of time someone can use. But somebody who's got very limited mobility can actually create in virtual reality.
Well, I mean, we've used a lot of kind of like Makey. For those who don't know, Makey is basically a keyboard emulator, which you can use fruit or tin foil and Play-Doh to kind of emulate keyboard or mouse clicks and so forth. So, you know, we could take something like that and apply that.
To animation, we've had young people that are led down, you know, they've had time out of their wheelchair, so they've been animating whilst they've been led down, having that break, because we've just made them a massive button that they can lean on to actually do it. So I just want to say,
I think for all the limitations of technology, I think there's so many positives. And I think a lot in the media at the moment, we get people are talking about things like Fortnite and kids getting addicted to Fortnite. And it's like, you know, in the 50s they were talking about kids and rock and roll, and, you know, it's like it never changes. And yes, I get it, and there is a worry that absolutely. And then we need to make sure kids are safe online particularly. But there's a lot of positivity with technology, and we can do wonderful things through 3D printing in the medical profession, you know, VR and the Connect, all these things are wonderful tools in the right hands.
Actually, what I was thinking as we were talking is that actually digital technology is not inherently a good or inherently a bad thing. It is just a thing. So those limitations can be around. And I was thinking again about some of the things that I've heard here about, and we were talking earlier about people having safe spaces. I think there was a conversation earlier about gaming and whether gaming was a good thing or a bad thing. And I was thinking, if you're shooting people online with AK-47s and you're 13 years old, I think that might be a bad thing. If you're doing one of those new, they're probably about 6 years old now, those questing games. I don't know if you've seen any of those, where where actually what you've got to do is find things, and I'm not talking about Fortnite, I'm talking about things like Skyrim and some of those the things where there is a whole world where as soon as you open up and you've got to find somebody who gives you something that gets you onto the next thing. There's lots of excitement. Sorry, the gaming addict is smiling. So there are lots of things that it is just a thing. So you can do good things with it, and you can also do things with it that are inherently not good, because they wouldn't be good in the real world either, I think is what I'm trying to say, but it took me a long time.
No, said very effectively.
I think one of the limitations in terms of potentially accessing the amazing things that digital can do is the cost. Because to commission 3D animators, to commission programmers, to buy equipment, like the new Oculus 8 is coming out, like the potential with that is absolutely incredible. I think they're like £1,000 each. You know, like some digital creators will charge £400 a day for their time. You know, and in an industry which is very risk averse anyway, to say, you know, this project might have this amazing effect, it'll cost £30,000, but it also might fail or need loads more development. In terms of actually getting the initial kind of innovation and setting up all the testing and finding out what does work and what doesn't work, it is a very expensive medium. So I think that's potential.
In our circumstances where I work, I find that digital technology, we struggle a bit because our interaction with the technology is sort of based on a personal soul experience. Just having control of the mouse, where you're going with things, what sections you're clicking on, it's very much a solo experience, and I think a lot of the games a lot of the sort of applications are designed that way to really engage you. But if I'm trying to work with a group, it's particularly difficult. Fantastic creative programs, but if you're not in control, and you're not kind of doing stuff, then people are shutting off really quickly within 20 seconds, 30 seconds. So I think that is a limit, and trying, technology is not as exciting. For my generation, the technology is still, it's magic, but it's utter magic. But I think for the younger generation, they're so used to it as well. So, and they're used to instant gratification. So a lot of the programs are built so you get a very satisfying result very quickly, but that's it. Then they get the hit. That's fine. On to the next thing. Whereas actually, it's a craft. We need to develop the craft, and it's almost things are designed to get you somewhere too quickly without the gratification of actually struggling a bit, building, just actually the physicality of actually getting on with something. So I think they're limitations. We skip maybe 10 steps to get somewhere where actually you haven't maybe deserved it. You haven't earned it yet, and I think that's very valuable for our young people.
And there's also, we are very specifically talking about using young people using technology to make things, which is that you can get a sense that you can do something and that you can do it independently, when actually really you can't, because that quick win, I've made this track or something, if you tried to replicate that yourself without that guidance, you wouldn't get to the same result. So I think it can lead you to a place where you don't progress quite as quickly as you might want to, because you got there quite quickly.
It's too quick.
It's much harder to make the next steps and to get to make your own practice.
Yeah.
So we're looking at those complexities, and I've spoken about learning by making, and actually it's difficult to do, to quite often introduce the pedagogies in the classroom or in the learning space as well, so that if we've got 30 young people, 15 young people using open source technology, open source software, low cost sensors, to introduce things like paired programming, so that they can create everything from scratch, create everything from the beginning, create everything from the bits that need to be soldered, and to go through the pain basically of that. As a researcher, how do you quantify, some of you might think back to Christmas and checking the Christmas lights. How do you quantify yes? And that's what we do with physical computing. But it's difficult if young people think that they have to get everything right, first of all. So this week we've been working with a group of undergraduates again at Manchester Met University in a makerspace, and a really interesting evaluation tool that uses artificial intelligence called Hubert, which sends out an evaluation to the young people as a chatbot. I was sceptical, I was doubting Thomas. They've opened up really, really well and said about their complexities, but actually how they've learnt differently and how it's been beneficial. And we've had to say to them, it's been uncomfortable for us to see you uncomfortable, but now you know this whole approach to learning is, it might be different to get it right first time and get to that next attainment stage.
That's great.
But the skills they're learning, aren't they, through that? It's that emotional regulation and things like that. We see that a lot with the young people, they get frustrated. But actually, thinking one young person in particular, I think the first time, he might be throwing a chair across the room because he's so frustrated, but we can see that progression of actually he's understanding that he'll get there, he just needs to perhaps approach it a different way.
Yeah, and we do have quite a few young people who return, don't they? And you do see a development. And actually,
see that trajectory.
A great example is like Charlie was about 10, 12 years ago. When he was like 7, he was attending QClub when I first kind of restarted.
Yes.
And now he's back volunteering. And he's at university. He's studying media, is it? I think.
Yes. Film and video.
Film and video. And I hope we had some kind of influence on him.
Well, he says he absolutely says the only reason he's doing that is because of his engagement.
And now he's back feeding back into the group for the next generation. So.
The digital space is a very competitive one. I'll ask Kat and Jade this first. how do you how do the kind of products you create, how do they find their place in that digital space? How do they retain it? How do they compete against the other stuff that's available?
Well, actually, it's very much the opposite, because one of the things in a hospital setting is potentially that you don't want to children to use something that they will then be using, like in a traumatic space such as the treatment room, that they would then use in the outside space, because it might cause re-triggering, you know, or remind. So actually, by creating something bespoke for the hospital environment, it's not something that is in their external world, and there's actually benefits to that, to just designing specifically for hospitals.
Yeah, and I think we're in quite a fortunate position as well, because we've commissioned internally within the hospital, whereas we meet many people who are outside of the NHS trying to get a product through the NHS procurement process, and that's incredibly long-winded and very expensive, and often by the time they get there, it's outdated. Yeah. Whereas because we're within the hospital and we working kind of directly and we're funded by the hospital's charity, we're able to be a bit more responsive and keep up with things a little bit quicker. And I hope kind of going forward our technology can evolve. But I think the point you made earlier about cost is really important. And that is actually one of the reasons up until, you know, recently why we haven't done so much, because it is so expensive. Yeah, I kind of forget where I was exactly going with that, but I think again, because we're in a hospital, I suppose, we rely a lot on goodwill. So people get really engaged with what we're trying to do, because who wouldn't want to support doing something nice for a kid who's going for a difficult time in a kids' hospital? So we're fortunate in that respect, but that doesn't mean that it's kind of easy to come across the money to push things forward or to keep these things going in a hospital.
And everyone else, any thoughts on how you find the space and hold it?
I think one of the things, one of the things we wanted to mention here but haven't yet is just how, because it is a very crowded area, and a lot of the things that young people might be attracted to, particularly the sort of young people that we might come across with in this environment, is that they quite like some risky stuff. They may be interested in media or music or other material that is not associated with a healthy lifestyle. And I mean that in the gentlest possible terms, because it can be, I don't know how many of you have heard of a musical style called drill. Yeah, one or two. That is essentially it's a strong part, can be a strong part of identity of people who are associated with it, and a musical identity is quite often very important to young people. But almost all of it is about othering people who do not live in your postcode or your street or are not a part of your culture, and othering them quite often in ways that are if you were to say it out loud, we would call it incitement to hatred, or it might even be criminal offence, some of it. But that you do get young people who it's important to them. It's part of their identity. I think Chris wanted to say a little more about that.
It's endless, isn't it? We all probably know that we spend far too much time online. So you enter into the digital online world, and people don't come back. It's very hard to re-engage someone who's just gone on down that route. It presents itself as the universe in the digital space. Sorry, I'm throwing this in your face. It presents itself as a digital space, but actually, in what we're doing, it's a bit of a cul-de-sac. You go down into the digital space, down this narrow thing, and then you're trying to find everything there. They don't want to come back out, and that's because that's their experience. It's a tactile thing. It's a habit-forming thing. So so competing with YouTube and competing with the access is my issue as a practitioner. And there are most days that I'm working, I wish the internet wasn't on. I just wish it wasn't there. I wish it wasn't an option. And to be honest, if I had a bucket and a spade and some pebbles, I'd make better. I'd be more creative with some of my young people than with all the media that we've got. Because we'd have to be, because that's all we got. And we could make the most out of it. So I do wonder whether it's an oversaturation, an overstimulation. I like this making your own media. I'm really interested in that, because that feels like it. You're engaging and you have a relationship with it. I'm not sure if the quick fix culture and digital culture is actually, are we forming a relationship with it or not? I'm not sure.
Can I just ask one very quick last question, then I'll try and make 5 minutes for questions from the audience. If someone is about to thinking of embarking on a technology-based project working with young people and health, could you give them one sentence of advice? Let's start from this end.
Oh, blimey. I think it's planning. I think planning, but also be willing to change and adapt, because you have to adapt to the young people and you have to adapt to their needs and you have to adapt to technology and its failures. And by the end of the day, you want to make sure everyone's engaged and you create the end product. So I think plan, but be ready to fail.
But also it's plan ABC and be prepared to produce X, Y, and Z, because that's obviously what happens. I would say, yes, we work in the funding we have for QClub allows us to work in a very child-centred way, which is very staff-heavy. What would I say? Make it accessible. I mean, a lot of the apps and a lot of the tools that we introduce to the young people, we try and use things that are either free or incredibly cheap, just £1 or £2 that they can then go home and they can use themselves. So it's actually to kind of embed that. So you're trying to cut out that problem with really expensive equipment and stuff like that. So we try and get them to get skills and tooled up on things that they can then go home and work on further and create their own stuff from as well. So I think that's really important.
So a manifesto is shaping up. So plan, make it accessible.
Yeah, I'd say connect with the network virtually, online or face to face. I'm involved with Leeds Raspberry Jam. We jam with computing like people jam with musical instruments. If I play the violin really badly, if we come together, we can share. Software developers, children, families, professionals. So to network face to face and then online.
Brilliant.
I'd say understand the current landscape, understand the clinical need, and understand the range of creative media that's available. You need to have a multifaceted kind of approach to be able to navigate what's going to work best for your specific need.
Brilliant, thank you.
I suppose I would say engage. I think we had the most kind of development in this project by listening and responding and engaging, and I suppose flexibility is probably flexible to kind of evolve.
I would say 1% of any project is the end product. 99% is the process. So choose media that engages, involves, and that is an enjoyable process, because that's where the learning happens.
And I would say that the supporting guidance of an empathetic human being is not something that can be replaced digitally. Well, not yet.
Great, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes.
I was just wondering if any of the panel are engaging with your local academic health and science network.
Never heard of it. That went down well.
Find them, it's Yorkshire and Humber Academic Health and Science Network. They're funded to support digital innovation across the NHS. They have a huge website with lots of links, an innovation portal where you can post ideas and find clinicians and or others.
I would say that we're aware of that through Sheffield Children's Hospital.
Yeah, the NHS.
Yeah.
So they've just funded some quite significant innovations for dental and apps.
Yeah.
And for Yorkshire and Humber.
Yeah, and that's the comment I made earlier about procurement in the NHS. That came out. We did go to a digital event held in Sheffield, but I know they go around the country, don't they? This one happened to be about respiratory, wasn't it? I think, but many other people again outside of the NHS trying to get in, and they were really helpful actually in directing people to funding streams, and even for ourselves within the organisation. We're like, right, okay, that might be a good route for us going forward.
Yes.
Hello, I just wondered if anyone on the panel could talk about a project that they've managed to co-design and develop with young people, right from the kind of initiation of a product idea. Darby and nodding.
I think I was very aware as we answered that in terms of planning, and I think that was, I may have inferred that when I said do plan ABC but expect to do X, Y and Z. It's actually about co-production with the young people, so we kind of know, but then we do co-produce, especially with our older cohort who feed back and feed in, and I think that's really, again, really important in terms of developing a project in co-production with those young people. Again, because that just emphasises their sense of ownership and their enthusiasm and their engagement with it.
I think a project which kind of comes to mind was we did a QClub World, which is a virtual reality experience which young people created things out of cardboard, like painting, plasticine, watermelons with eyes stuck on it, which we managed to scan and then was dropped. So luckily I just managed to scan it before it was dropped and smashed into all these pieces of stuff. But with that was really interesting. It would have been easier for me to say to them, right, you're going to do, the kind of a power station over here, you're going to do a zoo over here, you're going to do this and this. But we allowed the children to lead that. And what happened is through the 6 weeks we worked on it, we gradually started seeing that city evolving naturally. You know, some children were kind of creating this kind of rundown neighbourhood, with the pollution and the kind of broken buildings, and they were interested in that, and they were navigating towards that, while others were kind of creating animals, and a zoo started to appear, and in a food district with like giant sausage hotel and a pizza sausage hotel and a pizza monster and so forth. So it kind of naturally developed, and it was quite organic in that way.
Yeah, so we set the framework, I guess, in that project, and then just let them do it. But I think that co-production element of getting their feedback of what they want to be doing in their projects, what type of skills they want to be learning as well, is really important to retain engagement as well.
I worked on an incredible project with Junction Arts and the community in Bolsover in Derbyshire over 18 months, and that started off in a small way with working with a primary school and teachers, parents and carers, so looking at parental engagement and looking at computing devices, that event-driven programming again, so making a light turn on when the environment gets to a particular level, say a temperature. And then that developed, it mushroomed and co-curated with that community and with the arts organisation. That culminated in an interactive light night with a 17th century castle, where the community had come together. There's a hashtag, This Girl Codes. They created beautiful acrylic roses, all mapped to contemporary and historical stories of strong women in the community. And they came together with the castle as they approached with GPS. The castle responded to them, live coding basically with a piece of music, with a heartbeat, and it was that interaction of the castle communicating with the community and vice versa, bringing it together. Pupil voice again, it was lovely.
Steve, 2 minutes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
Just very briefly.
Yeah.
In one of the secure units I worked with, there was a profoundly deaf young woman who deaf from birth, and we wanted to engage in musical activity, but this had been a very difficult subject for her because it had excluded her all her life, and she felt that it wasn't for her, but she felt the need to come and see what we could do. So we explored digital technologies. We got hold of some sub-packs. I don't know if you've seen these are jackets that respond to low frequencies, and you can feel the frequencies. So we attached that to we worked out what we're going to do. So we attached that to a drum kit, where she could now feel the drum kit much better than she could on an analog kit, which we could feel some vibrations, but this, and we started to tune them to specific areas of the body where you could sort of feel things better. She indicated that she could feel things here, where the jacket is only here, but she was feeling different frequencies in her wrists, in her neck. And eventually we used this technology to get her to sing in tune. And this was all collaborative with her and her interpreter. It was a marvellous process.
I'm sorry, I know that there are other people with questions, but far be it from me to keep you all from your lunch. So could I thank my panel very much indeed for what I think was an absolutely fascinating and informative talk.